The grand hall of the imperial palace stretched so wide that clouds formed near its ceiling. Thousands of dignitaries from across the galaxy filled the massive space, their various forms creating a sea of colors and shapes that would have been impossible on any single world. At the center of it all stood Queen, her silver skin gleaming under the ceremonial lights, her 4 arms draped in the traditional robes of her people. Beside her stood Han Solo, and he looked painfully ordinary. He was human, which meant he had only 2 arms, stood barely 6 feet tall, and possessed none of the natural weapons or defenses that most galactic species took for granted. His dark hair was neatly combed, his simple black suit fit him well, and his expression remained calm and pleasant. To the assembled crowd, he appeared to be exactly what the official reports claimed, a mid-level diplomat from Earth who had somehow won the lottery of political marriages. Glanced at him from the corner of her eye. 3 weeks ago, she had never heard of Han Solo. The human delegation had arrived with their proposal for a marriage alliance, and they had specifically requested that Han Solo be the chosen partner. When she had asked why, the human ambassador had simply smiled and said he was uniquely qualified for the role. She had reviewed his file, military service in his youth, followed by decades of diplomatic work. No special commendations, no dramatic incidents, nothing that suggested he was anything more than competent and reliable. The humans claimed the marriage would cement peace between their species and prevent the territorial disputes that had been growing along their borders. Had agreed because it made political sense. The empire was vast and powerful, but adding humanity's resource-rich territories to her sphere of influence without a war seemed efficient. If all it cost was a marriage to an unremarkable human, so be it. The high priest of the raised all 6 of his arms, and the hall fell silent. His voice boomed across the space, amplified by ancient technology built into the very walls. We gather to witness the union of Queen, sovereign of the empire, conqueror of the outer reaches, she who commands the stars. The titles continued for nearly 5 minutes, stood perfectly still as she had been trained since childhood. Beside her, Han Solo waited with equal patience, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. She noticed he never fidgeted, never shifted his weight. His breathing was so controlled it was almost invisible. Finally, the priest turned to Han Solo. And Han Solo of Earth, representative of humanity, who comes before us to join his life with our beloved Queen. That was it. No titles, no grand accomplishments, just his name and his planet. Heard the whispers starting in the crowd. The translation devices built into her neural implants picked up fragments of conversation. A human, truly. I heard they barely survived first contact. Primitive weapons, no shields. The Queen must be making a statement. Show the lesser species they have value. Poor thing, probably. Doesn't even understand what he's agreeing to. Kept her face neutral, but annoyance flickered through her. The marriage was political, yes, but the casual dismissal of her chosen partner reflected badly on her judgment. She made a mental note to have her intelligence officers review which nobles were being most vocal in their mockery. The ceremony continued. Vows were exchanged in both languages. Han Solo's was perfect, she noticed. Not just grammatically correct, but his accent was flawless, capturing the tonal subtleties that most species found impossible to replicate. When had he learned to speak so well? She spoke her vows in English, which felt clumsy in her mouth despite months of practice. Han Solo smiled at her effort, and something in that smile made her pause. It wasn't the nervous smile of a man in over his head or the calculating smile of a social climber. It was genuine warmth, tinged with something she couldn't quite identify. Amusement, perhaps. When the ceremony concluded, they sealed the marriage in the traditional way, a brief touching of foreheads while the assembled crowd witnessed. Han Solo stepped forward without hesitation, and as their skin made contact, felt something odd. A faint tingle like static electricity, but deeper. It was gone in an instant, and she dismissed it as nerves. The feast that followed was elaborate, as required for a royal wedding, and Han Solo sat at the high table, surrounded by the most important nobles and military leaders of the Empire. The food was specially prepared to be safe for human consumption, though noticed Han Solo ate sparingly. Commander OK, leader of the Third Fleet and one of his most trusted military advisors, leaned toward Han Solo with a predatory grin. "Tell me, human, have you ever seen combat? Real combat, not your species' small territorial skirmishes." Han Solo set down his glass carefully. "I served in the military when I was younger, yes." "Ah, but Earth has been at peace for decades now, hasn't it? Since before you made contact with the wider galaxy." "We've had our conflicts," Han Solo replied mildly. OK laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "Conflicts. They have conquered 43 star systems in the last century alone. We've fought species that could shatter planets with their weapons. No offense intended, but your people are, new to this, fragile." "None taken," Han Solo said, still smiling. Intervened before OK could continue. "Commander, perhaps we should focus on the future alliance rather than dwelling on past differences in experience." "Of course, my queen, I meant no disrespect." OK bowed his head, but the amusement never left his eyes. Later that evening, after the feast had ended and most of the guests had departed, and Han Solo retired to the royal quarters. The rooms were vast, decorated in the flowing style of architecture, with separate sleeping chambers connected by a shared common area. They stood in the common area, the awkwardness of new marriage settling over them. Had been married twice before for political reasons, but those had been to other nobles. She knew the expectations, the boundaries, the unspoken rules. This was different. "You speak our language remarkably well," she said, breaking the silence. "Thank you, I've always had a gift for languages." "And you seemed very calm during the ceremony, despite the less than welcoming attitude of some of my nobles." Han Solo shrugged. "I've experienced worse." "Have you?" Studied him more carefully. In the softer light of the private quarters, she noticed things she had missed before. The way he stood suggested military training, but not the rigid posture of a soldier. Something more fluid, more aware. His eyes were constantly moving, tracking things she couldn't see, processing information she couldn't guess at. "What did you do in the military?" she asked. "Your file says you served, but it's remarkably vague about details." "I was in special operations," Han Solo said after a pause. "The kind of work that doesn't make it into official files." "I see," waited, but he didn't elaborate. "And now you're a diplomat." "Now I'm your husband," he corrected gently. "The diplomatic work was just preparation." "Preparation for what?" Han Solo met her eyes, and for just a moment she saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. Depth, power, something vast and controlled, like an ocean held behind glass. Then he smiled, and it was gone, replaced by the pleasant, unremarkable expression she was getting used to. "For this," he said simply, "for being here with you, for whatever comes next." Didn't know what to make of that answer. She excused herself to her sleeping chamber, leaving Han Solo in the common area. As she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about that brief moment when his eyes had changed. Had she imagined it? Was she so unused to humans that she was reading things into ordinary expressions? She fell asleep still wondering, unaware that in the common area Han Solo stood perfectly still in the darkness, his eyes closed, his breathing controlled. Around his hands, invisible to any scanner that possessed, the air shimmered very slightly with contained energy. He was checking the palace defenses, feeling the flow of power through the walls, noting the positions of guards and the signatures of potential threats. It was habit, born from decades of training that had nothing to do with diplomacy and everything to do with survival. He had meant what he said too. He was here for whatever came next, and given what humanity knew about the forces moving in this part of the galaxy, something would come. Soon. 3 weeks of marriage had passed in a blur of state functions and formal dinners. Found herself growing accustomed to Han Solo's presence. He was quiet but observant, polite but never servile. He attended every function she required, learned the names and faces of hundreds of nobles, and somehow managed to avoid giving offense while also refusing to be treated as a lesser being. The other human delegates had returned to Earth after the wedding, leaving Han Solo as the sole representative of his species in the court. If he felt isolated or overwhelmed, he never showed it. Had caught him a few times standing alone on observation decks, staring out at the stars with an expression she couldn't read. Tonight's banquet was being held aboard the royal flagship, a vessel so large it had its own weather systems in the park districts. The occasion was the annual Festival of Conquest, celebrating the Empire's military victories. Over 300 guests filled the grand dining hall, including all of its top military commanders and most influential nobles. Wore her formal armor, a ceremonial piece that was still fully functional. Beside her, Han Solo wore another simple suit, this one deep blue. She had offered to have armor made for him, but he had politely declined, saying he preferred to dress in his own style. Commander OK was holding court at a nearby table, regaling younger officers with stories of past battles. His voice carried across the hall. And then the commander thought he could stand against our shields. We burned through his flagship in under 30 seconds. The fool never even got a shot off. Laughter erupted from the table. Noticed Han Solo watching the commander with a neutral expression. "Does it bother you?" she asked quietly. "The way they talk about violence so casually." Han Solo considered the question. Every culture celebrates different things. The value strength and conquest. It's honest at least. And what does humanity value? Survival, Han Solo said simply. We celebrate whatever helps us survive. Before could ask what he meant, the lights flickered. It was just for a second, barely noticeable. But Han Solo's entire posture changed instantly. He went from relaxed to alert in a heartbeat, his eyes scanning the room with sudden intensity. "Get down," he said quietly. "What?" "Get down now." The doors at both ends of the hall exploded inward. Armed figures in black armor poured through, their weapons already firing. Plasma bolts screamed across the room, striking nobles and guards alike. The banquet dissolved into chaos as people scrambled for cover. Personal shields activated automatically, a shimmering barrier forming around her. Her guards surged forward, returning fire, but the attackers had planned well. They knew the layout, knew where the guards would be positioned. Within seconds, half of security detail was down. She recognized the armor, faction of the Pure Dawn, a radical group within her own empire that opposed any alliance with lesser species. They had been vocal in their criticism of her marriage to Han Solo, but she had never imagined they would attempt something this bold. One of the attackers threw a device toward her position, recognized it instantly, a shield breaker designed to overload personal barriers. She tried to move, but there were too many people in the way, too much chaos. The device detonated. Her shield flickered, weakened. 3 attackers focused their fire on her position, their plasma bolts converging. She was going to die. After decades of ruling, after surviving countless political threats, she was going to die at a banquet because of her own subjects. Han Solo stepped in front of her. He didn't run or dive. He simply stepped forward, smooth and deliberate, placing himself between and the incoming fire. She wanted to scream at him to get out of the way, this ordinary human who would be vaporized instantly. The plasma bolts stopped. Not just slowed, not deflected. They stopped completely, frozen in the air 3 inches from Han Solo's outstretched hand. The bright blue energy hung motionless, as if time itself had paused. The entire hall went silent for a heartbeat. Even the attackers stopped firing, stunned by what they were seeing. Han Solo's hand moved slightly, and the plasma bolts reversed direction. They shot back toward the attackers with twice their original speed, punching through military-grade armor like it was paper. 3 attackers collapsed, smoking holes in their chests. Then Hansol moved. Had seen many warriors in her life. She had watched master duelists, elite soldiers, combat champions from a dozen different species. She had never seen anything like this. Hansol flowed across the room like water, each movement precise and economical. An attacker aimed at him from the left. Before the shot could fire, the weapon simply fell apart in the attacker's hands, components separating and clattering to the floor. Hansol's hand passed near another attacker, and the figure flew backward as if struck by an invisible giant, hitting the wall hard enough to dent the metal. No weapons, no visible technology, just Hansol's hands and something couldn't understand. An attacker tried to shoot him in the back. The bolt curved around Hansol's body, as if the space around him was bent, and struck another attacker instead. Hansol reached out toward 3 attackers grouped together, made a grasping motion, and they all collapsed simultaneously, their armor crumpling inward from some unseen pressure. The leader of the attackers, recognizable by the red markings on his armor, pulled out a blade and charged directly at Hansol. It was a good tactic. Energy weapons clearly weren't working. But as the blade came down, it stopped. Just stopped, the edge resting against Hansol's raised forearm without cutting. Hansol looked at the attacker calmly. "Drop it." The blade fell from the attacker's grip, as if his hands had simply forgotten how to hold it. Then the attacker rose into the air, lifted by nothing visible, dangling helplessly. "Who sent you?" Hansol asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the now silent hall. The attacker tried to speak but choked. Hansol made a small gesture and the pressure eased. "Who sent you?" "The pure dawn," the attacker gasped. "We won't let our empire be polluted by lesser species. Kill me if you want. Others will come. We'll never accept a human in the royal family." Hansol nodded slowly. "I see." He lowered his hand and the attacker dropped to the floor. Before the figure could move, royal guards surrounded him, weapons ready. Hansol turned to survey the room. 12 attackers in total, 8 dead, 4 unconscious or disabled. The entire fight had lasted maybe 90 seconds. Hansol's formal suit was completely unstained. He wasn't even breathing hard. The surviving guests stared at him in absolute silence, realized she was shaking, not from fear but from shock. What had she just witnessed? Hansol walked back to her, his movements once again ordinary and unremarkable. "Are you hurt?" Couldn't speak, she just shook her head. "Good." He looked around at the staring crowd. "I apologize for disrupting the banquet. I believe the immediate threat has been neutralized." Commander OK stepped forward, his weapon still drawn. What are you?" Hansol met his eyes calmly. "I'm the Queen's husband, and I take my responsibilities seriously." "That's not an answer. No human should be able to do what you just did. No one should be able to do that without technology." "I used to work in special operations," Hansol said mildly. "We had specialized training." "Specialized training doesn't let you stop plasma bolts in midair." Found her voice. "Commander, stand down." She was still shaking, but her tone was firm. "Hansol just saved my life and the lives of everyone in this room. Whatever questions we have can wait until we're secure." OK hesitated, then lowered his weapon. "As you command, my queen." The guards began securing the prisoners and tending to the wounded. Medical teams arrived. Let her staff handle the logistics while she tried to process what she had seen. Hansol stood quietly beside her, waiting, patient, as if he hadn't just done the impossible. Finally, when the hall had been cleared and they were being escorted back to secure quarters, turned to him. "We need to talk." "Yes," Hansol agreed. "I believe we do." "Privately, no guards, no recorders, no witnesses." "Understood." They reached their quarters. dismissed all her guards, sealed the doors, and activated the privacy protocols that would block any surveillance. Only then did she turn to face Han Solo fully. "What are you?" she demanded. "And don't give me that answer about special operations. I want the truth." Han Solo was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "All right, but once I tell you, everything changes. You'll see humanity differently. You'll see the galaxy differently. Are you certain you want this? I just watched you stop energy weapons with your bare hands. I think I deserve an explanation." "You deserve the truth," Han Solo corrected. "Whether you want it is a different question." Drew herself up to her full height, all four arms crossed. "I am queen of the Empire. I have ruled for 40 years, survived 3 assassination attempts before tonight, and conquered territory that spans a dozen star systems. I can handle the truth." Han Solo smiled slightly. "Yes, I believe you can," he gestured to the sitting area. "This might take a while, you should sit down." Sat, her eyes never leaving Han Solo's face. Whatever she was about to learn, she had the feeling it would change everything. Han Solo sat down across from, his movements still carrying that fluid grace she now recognized as something far beyond ordinary training. He was silent for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. "How much do you know about Earth's history?" he finally asked. Frowned. "The standard information available to all galactic civilizations. Your species evolved on a garden world, developed technology relatively recently, and made first contact with the 30 years ago. You've been peaceful since then, focused on trade and diplomacy." "That's the official version," Han Solo said. "It's true as far as it goes, but it leaves out the most important parts." "Which are?" Han Solo stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "Humanity has been having contact with things from beyond our reality for thousands of years. Long before we developed, before we even had written language, we knew there was more to the universe than the physical world." Felt a chill run through her. "Beyond your reality, what does that mean?" "The universe you know, the one thee and other galactic species inhabit, is built on physical laws. Matter, energy, gravity, the speed of light. These are the rules your technology works within." Han Solo turned to face her. "But there are other rules, other dimensions, other forces that most species never encounter because they focus entirely on technological advancement." "You're talking about superstition, mythology." "I'm talking about proven, repeatable phenomena that your science doesn't have the framework to measure," Han Solo replied calmly. "Humans call it different things. Some say psychic power, others say magic, some call it the fundamental force of consciousness itself. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that some humans can interact with these forces, manipulate them, use them." Stared at him. "You're saying you have powers, supernatural abilities." "There's nothing supernatural about it," Han Solo said. "It's as natural as gravity, just operating on principles your species hasn't discovered yet. We call people like me." "Yes, individuals trained to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. What you saw tonight was basic telekinesis and energy manipulation. There's much more we can do." His mind raced. If this was true, if humans really possessed these abilities, it would explain so much. The way Earth had survived first contact despite having less advanced technology. The confidence with which human diplomats negotiated, as if they held cards no one else could see. The insistence that Han Solo specifically be chosen for this marriage. "Show me," she said. "Prove it." Han Solo nodded. He held out his hand, palm up, and concentrated. A small sphere of light appeared above his palm, glowing with soft blue radiance. It wasn't fire or plasma or any energy recognized. It simply was, existing because Han Solo willed it into being. The sphere rose into the air, growing larger. Then it split into multiple spheres, each a different color, orbiting each other in complex patterns. They moved faster, creating intricate designs in the air, shapes that seemed to shift and change even as watched. Then the spheres merged back into one and vanished. The entire display had been silent, controlled, and completely impossible by any technology understood. "That's just light manipulation," Hansol said. "A parlor trick, really. Let me show you something more substantial." He walked to a table where a decorative sculpture sat, a piece of solid metal weighing at least 50 pounds. Hansol pointed at it and the sculpture rose into the air. It didn't just float. It rotated, twisted, and then its shape began to change. The metal flowed like liquid, reforming into different shapes. A cube, a sphere, a complex geometric form that hurt to look at, and finally back to its original configuration before settling gently back onto the table. "Matter manipulation," Hansol explained. "I didn't change its atomic structure, just rearranged its form temporarily. A skilled can do far more dramatic transformations." Stood up, walked to the sculpture, and touched it. It was cool to the touch, solid, showing no sign of the impossible transformation she had just witnessed. "How many of you are there?" "Thousands on Earth and our colonies. Maybe one in every 100,000 humans has the potential. Most never develop it. Those who do undergo years of training. And your government knows about this." "Our government consists largely of," Hansol said bluntly. "We realized centuries ago that trying to keep such power separate from political structures was impossible. Better to integrate it, control it, make sure it's used responsibly." Sat back down, her mind reeling. Why keep this secret from the galaxy? Why let everyone think humanity is weak? "Because we learned early that power attracts attention and not all of that attention is friendly." Hansol returned to his seat. "When humanity first ventured into space, we encountered things. Not just other species but entities from other dimensions. Predators, parasites, things that feed on consciousness, on life force, on the energy of civilized worlds. I've never heard of such things. Most species haven't. They're protected by something we call the veil, a natural barrier between dimensions. But the veil isn't perfect and it's getting weaker. These entities slip through the cracks. Humanity has been fighting them for generations, keeping them away from populated space." "Felt cold, fighting them how?" "The same way I fought those assassins tonight, but on a larger scale. Can perceive these entities, fight them on their own terms. We've created a network, a psychic infrastructure that spans human space and beyond. It detects breaches, reinforces weak points, and allows us to respond to threats before they become catastrophic." "And you never told anyone else about this?" Hansol's expression was grave. "Would you have believed us? If humans had made first contact and immediately started talking about invisible monsters from other dimensions, what would your response have been?" Had to admit he had a point. "We would have thought you were insane or trying to manipulate us." "Exactly. So we took a different approach. We presented ourselves as a young, friendly species. We built trade relationships, cultural exchanges, and diplomatic ties. We let the galaxy underestimate us while we quietly did the work of keeping everyone safe." "That seems incredibly arrogant, deciding what other species should or shouldn't know." "It is," Hansol agreed. "But the alternative was watching civilizations destroy themselves when they encountered threats they couldn't perceive or fight. We've seen it happen before, to species that existed before the current galactic community. Entire worlds gone silent, populations vanished, and no one knowing why because they couldn't see what killed them." Stood again, packing. This was too much information, too many revelations. "Why are you telling me this now? Why reveal yourself?" "Because you're my wife," Hansol said simply. "And because you would have found out eventually. Better to hear it from me in private than to discover it in a crisis." "And the marriage? Was this the plan all along? Use me to gain influence in the Empire?" "No," Hansol's voice was firm. "The marriage was arranged because the human government believes the Empire needs to know the truth. You're expanding into regions of space where the veil is weak. Your ships, your colonies, they're going to encounter things that your weapons can't fight. We wanted an ally who could understand, who could help us protect both our peoples. So I'm meant to be a bridge between humanity's secret and the... If you choose to be. You could also reject all of this, call me insane, have the marriage annulled. I would understand. Stopped packing and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who had seemed so ordinary, so out of place in her empire. Who was actually one of the most dangerous beings she had ever met, capable of things that her understanding of reality. Is there more, she asked. Are you holding back? I'm not telling you everything, Han Solo admitted. Some things are too dangerous to share, even with you, and some things you need to see to believe. But I've told you the core truth. Humanity has power that the galaxy doesn't know about, and we use that power to fight threats most species can't perceive. Was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. I need proof, not parlor tricks, real proof that these threats you're talking about exist. Han Solo nodded slowly. I can arrange that. There's a facility on Earth where we train, where we monitor the dimensional barriers. I could take you there, show you everything. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. You'll carry this knowledge for the rest of your life. I've carried the weight of an empire for 40 years. I can handle one more burden. Then we'll go to Earth. I'll show you the truth of what humanity really is. Han Solo stood. But first, you should rest. This has been a difficult night. Laughed, a sharp, slightly hysterical sound. Rest. After learning that my husband can bend reality and that invisible monsters from other dimensions are real, I don't think I'll sleep for a week. Try anyway, you'll need your strength. Han Solo moved toward his sleeping chamber, then paused. For what it's worth, I meant what I said at our wedding. I take this marriage seriously. You're not just a political tool to me, you're my partner, my equal, and I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. After he left, stood alone in the common area, trying to process everything. She walked to the window and stared out at the stars, wondering how many other secrets were hiding in that vast darkness. Behind her in his chamber, Han Solo sat in meditation. His consciousness expanded outward, touching the psychic network that connected all. He sent a simple message to Earth. The Queen knows. Prepare for her arrival. Responses came back immediately, dozens of minds acknowledging his message. The network pulsed with energy, with power, with the combined will of thousands of trained individuals all working toward the same goal. And somewhere in the dark spaces between dimensions, something noticed that pulse. Something hungry stirred and began to move toward the light. The journey to Earth took 3 days. Traveled in a small diplomatic ship with minimal crew, accompanied only by Han Solo and 2 of her most trusted guards. She had told her advisors she was conducting a private visit to her husband's, which was technically true. What she hadn't told them was that she was about to see something that would change her entire understanding of the universe. Earth appeared in a blue and green marble hanging in the darkness. Had seen images before, but actually seeing it was different. It looked so peaceful, so ordinary. Nothing suggested that this world was home to beings who could manipulate reality itself. They didn't land at any of the major spaceports. Instead, Han Solo directed the ship to a remote region, mountains covered in snow and ice. The ship set down in a valley where no settlements were visible, just endless white peaks stretching in every direction. Where are we? Asked. The Himalayas, Han Solo replied. One of Earth's oldest mountain ranges, and home to the oldest training facility on the planet. They stepped out into the cold. His environmental suit protected her, but she could still feel the bite of the wind. Her guards followed, their weapons ready, scanning for threats. Han Solo walked toward what looked like solid rock face. He placed his hand against the stone and felt a pulse of energy. The rock shimmered and faded, revealing a tunnel leading deep into the mountain. An illusion, she asked. Psychic camouflage, Hansol corrected. The entrance has been here for 2,000 years. Satellites pass over this region constantly, but they never detect anything unusual. They walked into the tunnel. Lights appeared as they moved, soft illumination that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The tunnel sloped downward, deeper into the mountain, and opened into a massive chamber. Stopped stunned. The chamber was enormous, easily a mile across. The walls were carved with symbols that seemed to shift and move when she looked at them, but what captured her attention was the activity. Hundreds of humans moved through the space, engaged in various activities. Some sat in meditation. Others practiced combat techniques that involved no physical contact, opponents flying backward from invisible forces. In one corner, a group of people were creating complex structures out of pure light. "Welcome to the sanctuary," a voice said. A woman approached them, older than Hansol, with streaking through her black hair. She moved with the same fluid grace that now recognized as the mark of a queen. "This is Da," Hansol introduced. "She's one of our master-level instructors and a specialist in temporal manipulation." "Temporal," repeated. "You mean time?" Da smiled. "In a limited sense, yes, watch." She held out her hand and a flower appeared in her palm. Watched as the flower bloomed in fast motion, wilted, died, and then reversed, growing young again. The cycle repeated several times before Da closed her hand and the flower vanished. "I created a localized time field," Da explained. Within that small space, time moved faster than normal, then reversed. It's exhausting to maintain and has severe limitations, but it's useful in certain situations. His mind struggled to accept what she was seeing. Time manipulation should be impossible. The energy requirements alone would be astronomical. "That's where most species get stuck," Da said. "They think in terms of energy and technology. We think in terms of will and consciousness. The universe responds to intent if you know how to ask." They walked through the chamber, and Hansol explained what they were seeing. The meditating individuals were strengthening their connection to what he called the source, the fundamental force that drew upon. The combat practitioners were learning to defend against both physical and psychic attacks. The light sculptors were practicing fine control, learning to manipulate energy at the quantum level. "How long does training take?" asked. "Years," Hansol replied. "Most train for a decade before they're considered competent. Masters like Dev spent their entire lives developing their abilities." They reached another chamber, smaller but filled with technology that actually looked like technology. Screens showed data, maps, complex readings that couldn't interpret. "This is the Veil Network Control Center," Hansol explained. "From here, we monitor dimensional stability across known space and beyond." A young man looked up from his console. "Hansol, good to see you, and this must be Queen," he bowed slightly. "I'm Wu. I work on breach detection and response." "Breach detection?" asked. Wu gestured to the screens. "These show weak points in the dimensional barriers. See these red spots? Those are places where entities from other dimensions are trying to push through. We dispatch teams to reinforce those points before anything dangerous can cross over." "This happens frequently." "Multiple times per day," Wu said. "Most breaches are small, easily managed, but occasionally we get larger ones that require significant resources to handle." Studied the displays. She saw markers throughout the galaxy, including several in space. "You've been operating in my empire's territory." "Only to protect it," Da said. "We don't interfere with affairs. We simply stop things from eating your citizens." "Eating." Hansol pulled up an image on one of the screens. It showed something that made skin crawl. A mass of writhing energy, vaguely organic in shape, covered in what looked like eyes and mouths. "This is what we call a shade. It feeds on consciousness, on the life force of sentient beings. If one of these gets into a populated area, it can drain thousands of minds in hours, leaving empty husks behind." And you fight these things when necessary. Usually we prevent them from crossing over in the first place. Han Sol switched to another image, this one showing and engaging with a similar entity that was surrounded by a complex web of energy, striking at the creature with bursts of light. Wu here is particularly good at this. He can phase between dimensions, following these things to their source. Wu shrugged modestly. I've had some success. Day is better at the really dangerous stuff. They spent hours in the facility, met dozens of, each with different specialties and abilities. She saw demonstrations that everything she thought she knew about physics. A young woman who could create objects from nothing, pulling matter from what Han Sol called quantum foam. A man who could project his consciousness across light years, seeing distant worlds without any technology. An elderly teacher who could read memories from objects, touching a stone and describing everyone who had ever held it. But the most impressive thing was the network itself. Da brought her to a special chamber where the psychic infrastructure was visible to those trained to see it. Close your eyes, Da instructed. I'm going to open your mind to the network temporarily. It won't hurt, but it might be overwhelming. Hesitated, then closed her eyes. She felt Da's hand on her forehead, and suddenly she could see. It was like looking at the universe for the first time. Lines of light connected every in the facility, and those lines extended outward, touching other nodes across Earth, across human space, across the galaxy. Thousands upon thousands of minds working together, creating a web of protection so vast it was hard to comprehend. And beyond that web, she saw them. The things in the darkness, shapes that her mind couldn't fully process, entities that existed in dimensions she couldn't perceive. They pressed against the web looking for weaknesses, hungry for the life and consciousness on the other side. They held them back, constantly, endlessly, without rest. A battle that had been going on for centuries, that most of the galaxy never even knew about. Opened her eyes, gasping. The vision faded, but the knowledge remained. How long? She managed to ask. How long have you been doing this? Since before we left Earth, Da said gently. Ancient human civilizations knew about these threats. They built monuments, created rituals, developed practices to strengthen the barriers. When we developed space travel, we didn't leave that knowledge behind. We brought it with us, adapted it, made it stronger. And no one else knows. A few species have discovered pieces of the truth, Han Sol said. But most focus so heavily on technology that they've lost touch with these deeper forces. They think if something can't be measured by their instruments, it doesn't exist. Sat down, her legs suddenly weak. My people have been protected this entire time by a species we considered inferior. We've been saved by humans we thought were primitive. Not inferior, Han Sol said firmly. Different. They have built an incredible empire through strength and technology. Humanity chose a different path. Neither approach is wrong. They're just suited to different challenges. But now you're telling me that my empire, everything we've built, is vulnerable to threats we can't even perceive. Da knelt beside her. You're not alone anymore. That's why we wanted you to see this. They are expanding into regions where the veil is weak. You need to know what's out there, and you need to know that humanity will stand with you against it. Why? Asked. Why help us? We've done nothing for you. We've treated your people as lesser beings. Because that's what we do, Han Sol said simply. We protect life, all life. It doesn't matter if you're human or any other species. When something threatens consciousness, threatens civilization, we fight it. It's not about politics or power. It's about survival. An alarm suddenly blared through the facility. Wu rushed to his console, his face going pale. Major breach detected. Class 5 entity pushing through near space. Da was instantly alert. Location. Sector 773. That's near the Royal. Stood. There's something threatening my planet. Not just threatening, Wu said, typing rapidly. It's already through. The breach is stabilizing. This thing is big, and it's headed for the most populated area. Han Sol was already moving. Assemble a response team, full combat deployment. Already done, Wu replied. But it will take hours to get there, even with our fastest ships. Grabbed Han Solo's arm. My people are in danger. Yes, but we're going to stop it. He turned to Da. Can you open a portal? To space, that far, it will drain me completely. Do it, we don't have time for normal travel. Da nodded and began gathering energy. The air in the chamber started to shimmer. This will only stay open for a few minutes. Everyone going through needs to move fast. Watched as began assembling, grabbing equipment, preparing for battle. They moved with practiced efficiency, no panic, just focused determination. Han Solo looked at her. You should stay here, this is going to be dangerous. That's said, my people, I'm going with you. You're not trained for this kind of combat. Then I'll stay back and watch, but I'm not hiding while my world is under attack. Han Solo studied her face, then nodded. Stay close to me, do exactly what I say when I say it, understood? Understood. The portal opened, a swirling gateway to somewhere far away. Through it could see her and something dark hovering in its sky. They stepped through the portal and emerged in chaos. The royals stretched below them, cities glittering across the continents. But above those cities, something impossible hung in the sky. The void wraith was massive, easily the size of a small moon. Its form was difficult to look at directly. It seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, parts of it visible to normal sight while other sections faded in and out of reality. Where it moved, space itself seemed to tear, leaving dark wounds in the air that leaked something that wasn't quite energy and wasn't quite matter. Warships were already engaging it. Plasma bolts and missiles struck the creature's surface, but they passed through as if hitting smoke. A few seemed to connect with solid mass, but the damage healed instantly, the creature's form flowing back together like water. It's partially phased into another dimension, Wu said, appearing beside. Standard weapons won't work. We need to force it fully into this reality before we can hurt it. Da was already working, her hands moving in complex patterns. I'm trying to anchor it, but it's strong. I need help. More poured through the portal before it closed. Counted 20 in total, including Han Solo. It seemed like a pitifully small force against something so enormous. Han Solo's voice was calm but carried authority. Wu, focus on anchoring it to this dimension. Team 2, create a containment field. Don't let it reach the cities. Team 3, you're with me. We're going to hit it with everything we've got. The moved into position, watched as they worked, and suddenly she could see it. Not with her eyes, but with that deeper sense that had briefly opened. They were creating a web of energy around the wraith, pulling it, forcing it to solidify. The creature noticed. It let out a sound that felt rather than heard, a vibration that made her bones ache and her mind scream. Below, on the surface, people would be collapsing in pain. Her people, suffering because of this thing. Contact your fleet, Han Solo said. Tell them to focus their fire where you see the points of light. Those are the anchor points we're creating. If they hit those simultaneously, it might force the creature to fully materialize. Activated her communication device with shaking hands. Commander Okay's face appeared, looking strained. My queen, thank the gods you're safe. We're trying to fight this thing, but nothing works. I can see that, Commander. Listen carefully. I'm with human allies who specialize in fighting these creatures. They're creating weak points. I'm sending you coordinates now. Hit those points with everything you have, all ships firing simultaneously. Human allies, my queen, I don't understand. Trust me, Commander, do it now. Okay hesitated only a moment, then nodded. Transmitting coordinates to all ships, preparing synchronized strike. Watched the human work. Da's face was pale with effort, sweat pouring down her temples. Wu seemed to fade in and out of visibility, his form flickering as he moved between dimensions. The others maintained the containment field, a shimmering barrier that kept the wraith from descending toward the cities. Han Solo and his team moved higher, rising into the air without any visible means of support. They positioned themselves around the wraith's mass and saw energy gathering around their hands. Not the normal glow she had seen before, but something brighter, more intense. "All ships report ready," OK said, "awaiting your command." Han Solo called. He looked back at her and nodded. "Now." Fire commanded. The fleet opened up with everything they had. Hundreds of plasma cannons, dozens of missile batteries, energy weapons that could shatter small moons. All of it focused on the anchor points the had created. At the same moment, Han Solo and his team released their gathered energy. The combined assault was devastating. The wraith shrieked again, that bone-deep sound of pain and rage. Its form forced fully into normal space by the combined assault. For the first time, it became truly vulnerable. But it also became truly dangerous. The creature lashed out, tentacles of dark energy whipping through space. One struck a cruiser, and the ship simply ceased to exist, erased from reality as if it had never been. Another tendril came toward the positions. Raised a hand, creating a temporal barrier that slowed the attack to a crawl, but the effort made her collapse to her knees. Han Solo moved, had seen him fight before in the banquet hall, but that had been restraint. This was the full power of a master unleashed. He flew toward the wraith's core, trailing light behind him. Energy gathered around his body, a sphere of pure force that grew brighter and brighter. The wraith tried to strike him, tentacles converging from all directions, but Han Solo simply phased through them, his form becoming insubstantial and then solid again in rapid succession. He reached what looked like the creature's center and thrust both hands forward. The sphere of energy exploded outward, tearing through the wraith's mass like a blade through cloth. The creature screamed. Parts of it began to dissolve, unable to maintain cohesion in this dimension. But it wasn't dying. It was adapting, learning, growing new defenses. "It's regenerating too fast," Wu shouted. "We need to sever its connection to its home dimension or it will just keep healing." "I can see the connection," De gasped, "but I don't have the strength to cut it, not alone." Made a decision. She activated her fleet-wide channel. "All ships continue firing on my mark. I need a sustained barrage, everything you can give. Don't stop until I tell you." "My queen, our weapons are barely affecting it." "I know, but we're going to give the humans the opening they need. Prepare to fire on the dimensional anchor point." She turned to Da. "Show me where it is. I'll guide the fleet." Da looked up at her with exhausted eyes. "You'll be targeting something outside normal space. Your sensors won't detect it." "Then I'll trust your coordinates. Tell me where to shoot." Da described a point in space, numbers that made no sense to normal navigation, but that relayed to her fleet anyway. The commanders questioned the orders, but they obeyed. Han Solo was still fighting the wraith's core, buying time. Others maintained the containment field, though could see them struggling. The creature was too strong, too alien, too vast. "Fleet ready," OK reported. "On my mark," said. She looked at Da. "When they fire, can you channel the energy, redirect it to cut the dimensional connection?" "I can try, but the timing has to be perfect." "Then we make it perfect." Took a deep breath. "All ships fire." The fleet unleashed everything at coordinates in empty space. Plasma and missiles and energy beams converged on a single point that looked like nothing. Da raised her hands, her entire body glowing with strain. The incoming weapon's fire began to bend, redirected by her will. The energy curved through angles that shouldn't exist, following paths through dimensions couldn't perceive. And then it struck something. Reality itself seemed to tear, a wound in space that leaked dark light. The wraith convulsed, its connection to its home dimension severed. It was trapped here now, fully in this reality, cut off from the source of its power. Han Solo saw the opening. He gathered the other combat to him, and together they created something had no words for. A weapon made of pure will, shaped like light but cutting like nothing physical ever could. They drove it into the Wraith's core. The creature exploded. Not a physical explosion, but a dispersal, its essence scattering across dimensions. The dark mass dissolved into streams of fatting energy that dissipated into nothing. Silence fell across the battlefield. The Wraith was gone. Realized she had been holding her breath. She released it in a shaky gasp. Around her, they were collapsing from exhaustion, Delay on the ground, barely conscious. Wu was bleeding from his nose, the strain of dimensional phasing having taken its toll. Others were in similar states. Only Han Sol seemed relatively unaffected, though even he looked tired. He descended to where stood, landing softly beside her. "Your people fought well," he said quietly. "Without their sustained fire, we couldn't have severed the connection. And without your people, my world would be dead right now." Looked at the exhausted. "They saved billions of lives." Okay's voice came through her communicator. "My queen, what in the name of all stars was that thing? And how did the humans fight it when our weapons couldn't?" Looked at Han Sol, who nodded slightly. It was her choice what to tell her people. She took a deep breath. "Commander, prepare to receive a full briefing. It's time the Empire learned the truth about what exists beyond the stars we can see, and about the allies who have been protecting us from it." Over the next hours, as recovery teams worked and medical staff tended to the injured, spoke with her top military commanders and advisors. She told them about the dimensional threats, about the secret war humanity had been fighting while the galaxy remained unaware. There was shock, disbelief, anger at being kept in the dark, but there was also growing understanding. The evidence was impossible to deny. They had all witnessed the Wraith, seen their own weapons fail, watched humans succeed where technology could not. Commander Okay approached Han Sol, his expression complicated. "I mocked you at your wedding, called humans weak." "You weren't entirely wrong," Han Sol replied. "By your standards, we are physically weak. Our technology is less advanced, but we have different strengths." "That's putting it mildly." Okay extended one of his 4 hands. "I judged too quickly. I hope you can forgive an old soldier's prejudice." Han Sol shook the offered hand, already forgotten. Days later stood before the full council with Han Sol beside her. She had spent those days preparing her speech, gathering evidence, building her case. "For 40 years I have ruled this empire with one goal, to make us stronger, to expand our territory, to ensure the people dominate this galaxy." She paused, letting that sink in. "But I have learned that there are threats far greater than rival empires, dangers that exist beyond our ability to perceive, let alone fight." She told them everything. About the Veil Network, the dimensional entities. She showed them recordings of the Wraith attack, played testimony from survivors, presented analysis from their own scientists confirming that human abilities were real and measurable. Humanity has been protecting the galaxy, including us, for generations. They did this without asking for payment or recognition. They simply did what was necessary to preserve life. Looked around the council chamber. Now they offer us partnership, not as subjects, not as clients, but as equals in defending against threats that endanger all sentient beings. "And what do they ask in return?" one council member demanded. "What price for this protection?" Han Sol stepped forward. "Nothing but honest cooperation. Share intelligence about dimensional anomalies in your space. Allow our to operate when threats emerge. Work with us to strengthen the barriers that keep these entities out. In exchange, we will train volunteers who show psychic potential. We will share our knowledge. We will stand together against the dark." The debate lasted hours, but in the end, the vote was unanimous. The Empire would enter into a true alliance with humanity, based not on politics or territory, but on mutual survival. And Han Sol stood on the observation deck of her flagship, watching Earth rise in the distance. They had returned to finalize the treaty, but this time there were hundreds of diplomats, scientists, and military observers with them, all eager to learn about this new aspect of reality. "Everything has changed," said quietly. "A month ago I thought I understood the universe. Now I realize I knew nothing." "No one knows everything," Han Sol replied. "The universe is larger and stranger than any one species can comprehend, but together we can face it." "Together," tested the word. "I like the sound of that." She looked at her husband, this man who had seemed so ordinary, who had hidden so much power beneath a gentle exterior. He had saved her life, saved her world, and fundamentally changed how she saw reality. "What else haven't you told me?" she asked, echoing her words from their first private conversation. Han Sol smiled. "Give me time, we have a whole marriage to fill with revelations." Laughed, and this time it wasn't the calculated amusement of a queen. It was genuine joy from a woman who had found an equal partner in the most unexpected place. "Then I suppose," she said, taking his hand, "we'd better get started." Below them, Earth turned slowly in the void, a world that had seemed weak but held hidden strength. And around it, invisible to normal sight, the Veil network pulsed with the combined will of thousands of, standing guard against the darkness between dimensions. The galaxy would never be the same, but perhaps thought that was for the best. Some secrets once revealed led not to fear but to hope, and together, humans and whatever other species chose to stand with them would face whatever came from the dark. Together they would endure.